So, in the late 1800s, something absolutely wild happened. An entire continent, home to thousands of different cultures and nations, was essentially carved up and claimed by a handful of European powers. And they did it in what was, historically speaking, the blink of an eye. This whole period became known as the Scramble for Africa. And that really is the staggering question, isn't it? How on earth did a few countries from Europe manage to take control of almost all of Africa in just 30 years? It's an incredible thought. This massive land grab would literally reshape the world map and change the course of history forever. So that's what we're going to dig into. Okay, so to really get a grip on this, we've got to be clear on the main idea driving all of it: imperialism. Now, this isn't just about exploring new places, it's about control. It's a policy where a country actively expands its power and its influence, usually by colonizing other parts of the world. So, the big question is, why then? What was it about the late 1800s that kicked off this frantic race for territory? Well, there's no single easy answer. It was really a perfect storm of different motivations. We're talking economic, political, and cultural reasons, all hitting at once. You can pretty much boil all these reasons down into those three big buckets: economic, political, and cultural. It was this really powerful mix of money, national pride, and ideology. So let's break each of those down. First up, let's talk money. Europe was deep in the Industrial Revolution, and its factories were just constantly hungry for raw materials. We're talking rubber, palm oil, diamonds, timber, you name it. Africa looked like a gigantic, untapped treasure chest. And, just as important, once you've made stuff in your factories, you need people to sell it to, right? Well, these new colonies created a brand new, captive market for all those European goods. But, it wasn't just about the bottom line. It was also about national ego. Back in 19th century Europe, countries were super competitive, and having a huge empire was the ultimate status symbol. Grabbing colonies in Africa was a way for countries like Britain, France, and Germany to flex their muscles on the world stage. Having a bigger empire than the next guy, that was basically the scoreboard for who was top dog. Now, the cultural reasons, this is where it gets a little more complex. On one hand, you had many Christian missionaries who honestly believed that imperialism could be a force for good. They made the case that European control could help finally end the horrible slave trade, and it would also let them spread Christianity, which they saw as their moral mission. But then there was a much darker side to it. This was the rise of a deeply racist idea called Social Darwinism. Basically, people took Charles Darwin's scientific theory of survival of the fittest and twisted it. They applied it to human societies, arguing that Europeans were supposedly more fit or advanced. This gave them a warped justification, a supposed right, to go in and dominate other peoples they considered weaker. So you've got all these powerful nations scrambling for the same thing. What's going to happen? Well, the big fear was that they'd end up going to war with each other over African land. So to keep that from happening, they decided they needed to set some ground rules for how this whole land grab was going to work. And the moment everything got formalized, it all went down between 1884 and 1885. Leaders from 14 European countries, plus the United States, all met up in Germany for what's now known as the Berlin Conference. And the rules they came up with, you're not going to believe how simple they were. It pretty much came down to two steps. One, you had to tell the other European nations that you were claiming a piece of land. And two, you had to prove you could actually control it, usually by having troops or a government office there. And that's it. Seriously. And here's the absolute kicker, the most crucial, telling part of this whole story. Not a single African leader was invited to Berlin. Not one. The fate of an entire continent, its people, its cultures, its future, all decided in a conference room thousands of miles away by people with no right to be making those decisions. Okay, so we've talked about the high-level politics, but what did this actually look like on the ground? Well, these rules led to some really violent consequences. And a perfect case study for this is the long, brutal struggle for control of what we now call South Africa. It's a really powerful example of how different groups, both African and European, clashed over land. And believe me, this was not a simple two-sided fight. First, you had the powerful Zulu kingdom, which was expanding its own territory under the famous chief Shaka. Then you had the Boers. They were Dutch settlers who moved north to get away from British rule, and they came right into conflict with the Zulus. And finally, you had the British themselves, who eventually fought the Boers in the Boer War, won, and then consolidated their control over the whole region. So you have this three-way, brutal tug-of-war for dominance that went on for generations. So fast forward, after 3 decades of all this, the political motivations, the backroom deals in Berlin, the bloody conflicts on the ground, what was the end result? What did the map of Africa actually look like when the dust settled? Well, the whole thing, it really comes down to one single kind of shocking number. 2. That's right. By 1914, right at the start of World War I, the entire continent of Africa, with all its diversity and history, had been claimed and colonized by European powers. There were only 2 exceptions: Liberia, which had been established as a home for freed American slaves, and Ethiopia, which had amazingly managed to fight off an Italian invasion and keep its independence. And that leaves us with a really heavy question to think about. The lines that were drawn on the map of Africa during this scramble, they paid zero attention to the people who actually lived there, to the different ethnic groups, languages, and traditional kingdoms. So what happens? What are the long-term consequences, the instability, the conflicts, when the very borders of a continent are drawn not by its own people, but by outsiders?